Yeah, that was surprisingly a good part of that. But anyway, welcome back to the Bucket Think Tank. So we saw the Lion King today, and uh, uh, watch the animated one. I'm sorry. This was not a bad movie. Let's be clear, but the creative choice to make this look as real as possible, despite the fact that it was never going to be real, has sort of, I think, hampered this movie more than anything else. First of all, this movie is very much like Beauty and the Beast. I think on a more negative aspect of a Disney live action remake. Well, I pretty much gave Aladdin a lot of praise. This one I don't think is deserving of because Aladdin knew how to have the balance between what do we change, what do we not change, what do we expand on, what do we not expand on. This one has really chosen not to expand on much of anything that it should have expanded on. And that is sort of a shame added to this animation. Well, not animation, but how they chose to do it. So all the animals look and act too real. The problem is they're not dealing with a real situation here. This is sort of why we still anthropomorphize animals, and to sort of different degrees. There's like, hey, we gave them fingers and thumbs and legs, and they wear clothes. And then there's sort of like what the animated Lion King was. They have more subtle human features. In other words, the eyebrows. The importance of moving the eyebrow was never more important here. The way they hug one another with their hands here, and how they just fight is, I think, important. And granted, the lion fight at the end of this was actually really good, but because of how it looks, you never quite. It's more like a radio play sometimes. But the problem is they're playing stuff over. It feels in a lot of ways like someone just went on to National Geographic and dubbed over it. Like, this is National Geographic the story. That's what it is. And you can say that was possibly the only way to do this live action. And I think that proves maybe we shouldn't make live action movies of everything Disney's ever done that made a lot of money. Maybe because sometimes it doesn't look like they're talking. It doesn't look like it at all. Now, movies like Homeward Bound were able to get away with this because, well, that was the time, and they used actual animals. That that's fine. Fine. Homeward Bound was a good movie, so people don't really care. But this is supposed to be a remake of The Lion King, and this is why I'm so critical of these because they're pretty lazily done. This one's already grossed like $1 billion. It doesn't deserve that. This is one of those movies, and I think pretty much every live action remake does. It really coasts on the success of the original one. So don't be surprised if When Little Mermaid makes $1 billion, or when Maleficent, Mistress of All Evil, makes the same amount. Although I don't think it should, but it more than likely will. So, outside of that, what are the strengths of this movie? Well, we fleshed out Scar a bit more, and that has its pros and cons. First of all, this Scar is very much the bad guy. He's not as like manipulative and I think more player of the Game of Thrones, so to speak, as animated Scar is. Animated Scar is very good at manipulating people. Um, this Scar here, it's sort of obvious he manipulates people, but the addition to his backstory is it's loosely implied that Mufasa is the one that gave Scar the scar, which sometimes you see, sometimes you don't, because it is heavily implied, I think flat out stated by Scar that he once challenged Mufasa for the throne, and he lost. But he also mentioned Sarabi a lot too, and he seems very set on getting Sarabi. So Sarabi is the girl that got away. So that's sort of interesting. Um, uh, he doesn't do Be Prepared in the same way, which I think we all sort of knew was never going to happen. Because, Be Prepared is one of the great Disney villain songs. It was never going to live up to that. And so this one is sort of trying to merge into like a speech than anything else. And uh, maybe on second reviewings, I'll probably enjoy that speech a bit more. But I don't plan on seeing this in theaters a second time. Or is Scar's alright? The direction is alright, but he seems to be a bit more oblivious than his animated counterpart. His animated counterpart was very set on denial. And he's like, look, you're just not looking hard enough for the food. This one is sort of saying, like, yeah, it's fine because we can eat all we want now. He didn't seem to quite understand what Mufasa was doing with regulating the hunting. Like, we can't overhunt because then they'll leave and then they'll get further on the borders and there'll be no food left and we'll die. That is it. So, yeah, there's that. Where Scar in the animated one is very much in denial. You can definitely see the fact he doesn't want to admit that he's wrong. This one doesn't seem to be able to acknowledge the fact that there's a problem, and that's pretty much it. There's less charm to this Scar. Sarabi has a bit more to say, but doesn't really have much more to do. But it is implied, like we know with most lions, that they do the hunting. When Zazu gives the announcement that they're hyenas in the Pride Lands, he also mentioned like Sarabi and her lions are already out there. So that was cool. I love that little bit of dialogue. That little bit of addition is very clever world building. Um, Speaking of Zazu, he's hit and miss. Um, you get the idea he takes himself seriously. He also mentions that you cannot eat a member of the royal court, which I felt was interesting. I felt it was a little fun bit of addition to how the world's supposed to work. Mufasa, who was sort of the main reason I wanted to see this movie. I love James Earl Jones. I love whenever he speaks. He's got a really great voice. If you haven't heard him read The Raven, which also means you didn't watch the Simpsons episode with The Raven, so you're doing culture wrong. But this entire thing was great. His interactions with Simba I felt was fun. Um, it was a slightly different but slightly similar. He's a bit more strict in the animated one about certain things. Also a bit more fun in that way too. I think it might also just come down to the animation again, because there's a wider range of facial expressions that are in the animated one that aren't in the live action one. I think that sums up the animation problem that I tried to stumble through earlier. So we'll keep this here to remind myself of this failing. Simba he doesn't have the same amount of confidence and cockiness that the other one had. Um, Jonathan Taylor Thomas, I think, did a much different take on Simba that is also still very similar. He's just a kid who loves his dad and knows he's going to be king. Um, there's a bit more brattiness, I think, to this Simba, which is fine because he's a kid. He's allowed to be a brat. Um, Nala seems to be more of a voice of reason, which is fine. Um, when adult Nala's also the same. Again, because of the lack of facial expressions, the dialogue doesn't quite hit the same emotional beat. So Simba's tormented soul is kind of a strong word, but his grief hits differently. I'm not sure if it's just because of how it's written, but because of the lack of the facial expression. Because of that, this aesthetic really, I think, hurts this movie more than anything else. And Rafiki is also, I think he's designed to be more traditional, more tied to the culture. It's a bit more obvious, I think, in this one that Rafiki is the priest. He's the source of the religious cultural aspects of the Pride Lands, and Zazu is head of the politics. And it's nice to see those two just be in scenes together. I think that's really cool, especially because of how close they are to Mufasa and how much faith they have in him, and by default Simba. That's great. Timon and Pumbaa is more believable, I think, because Timon just looks like a meerkat. He looks like a meerkat, so many times he has like really sassy or quick wit, it just sort of falls apart. At least for me, because it feels like, again, did we just dub over an actual National Geographic? Um, Nala is Nala. That's sort of it. Maybe Can You Feel the Love Tonight is better on the album, like the soundtrack for this in this version, but I don't get how people are wowed by this rendition of it. I just think Beyonce's done better work. Just think she has. Um, I think the biggest issue for me in this movie is the final scene with Mufasa. It's totally lacking. It like when you see it, you're gonna wonder like the one thing you could have done. You chose not to do this. You chose not to go all out with this. Watching this makes you want to watch the animated one just to see how much better it was. That's it. It's not like, say, Aladdin, where you can watch it and say, okay, well, it did this, it did this, it did this, and I like that a bit better, but I like this a bit better. I see where you fleshed out. Really, again, real effort was put into Aladdin. I don't think was put into The Lion King. And I think that's a bit sad. But again, maybe there was no other way to tell this movie. And this sort of poses the question of adaptations. I think we should put adaptations to going far off, extremely different, like Maleficent, the ideal middle, which will be Aladdin, and then not really changing anything for the most part, which would be The Lion King. And maybe there's a bit more leeway between that. I really do want to do a series on Disney live action movies to really delve into that idea. But overall, how would I rate this movie? Well, I wouldn't give it a proper rating until I see it again. But overall, if you're a big fan of Disney live action remakes, I don't think you should, but whatever. Um, you probably go see it. Um, if you haven't seen The Lion King in theaters, I think you should see it just to say you have that experience because The Lion King is a brilliant movie. This movie does not take away from the attempted brilliance of the animated one, and there are some real gem moments here. There's a really cool scene with Timon and Pumbaa at the end that I'm not going to tell you about, but it's really good. It's really funny. It's really funny. It's almost worth going to see the whole thing. The jokes do stick. Most of the jokes stick. What they did with the hyenas, I think, is pretty clever here. What they did with Shenzi, I think, is cool. But if you're more critical of your Disney films, I would say give this a pass. Of and hope that Mulan will be better, from the looks of it. Maybe not. Maybe not. But anyway, with that, now we're bringing this video to a close here. If you're new to the Bucket Think Tank, feel free to like, comment, share, subscribe. Check out some other videos, and I will catch you all later. This is the Bucket Think Tank signing off. Thanks for watching, as always, fans. May your fandom serve you well.